Good afternoon, good morning. Hope everyone is doing well today. I'm Brenda Morrison. This is my colleague, Chris Adams. Welcome to the third part of our SimMakers workshop. We're glad you all could join us today. We know that some of you have been working on your simulations because we've been talking to a few of you over the last week, making good progress. So thanks. And just again, this is just a we're just every week is different here in this country at this time, and budgets and the allocation of tax money is in the news, and so we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. It works out just in timing in terms of our simulation, but we're going to be talking about the taxpayer receipt today and talking about analytics. And just a really quick story is that here in Denver, our hometown today, the city of Denver, city and county of Denver has had the simulation and taxpayer receipt for a couple years. And, for those of you that don't know, Denver, has just been booming. So it's not that too many people have been, questioning taxes or monies, because the economy, up till a few months ago was really healthy. But all of a sudden, between the social unrest and the COVID, things are not so healthy here. And there was, but as I said, Denver does have the simulation and they do have taxpayer receipt. And they've been sitting there, and they would get, they'd get some people looking at them. But earlier this week on Sunday, in the Sunday Denver Post, there was an article talking about the police department. We have had a pretty active protest movement here in Denver. And the reporter linked to the taxpayer receipt, and just tons and tons, just hundreds of people going to the taxpayer receipt in the simulation. And I took a peek today just to see what people were doing. And what's really good is some people were leaving very constructive comments, but they're educating themselves about our city's budget and where the monies go and the other needs that our city has, where the city's placing their priorities. And so at this time, it's just it's as a resident, and as of course as being the co-creator with Crystal Balancing Act, I feel really fortunate that that our city has this resource for people when they need to find out good, accurate information. So so it's just funny that Chris is going to be talking today about taxpayer receipt. We are going to go through some of those new features for you, and where I was, to be honest, looking around so that I could see Denver. The reason I knew Denver's was having a spike is because I could see it in their analytics. So all of you can check your analytics as well, and so we'll be able to see that. And speaking of that, just to be able to talk a little bit about how, if you have these tools available, how to make sure the public knows about them. In this case, a reporter found out. She put the link on, and now I'm seeing referrals from Instagram, Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. And so it's good for you can see how easy the tools are easily shareable, but also for your communications and PR department to know that they can control the narrative and use these our tools to their benefit. So at this point, just going to go through the normal drill. If you have a question, feel free to do that little hand or press a little, the question mark and the question icon. If you want to ask it personally, you're welcome to, or of course we'll ask it for you. If there's something pertinent, wanted to ask it right during Chris's presentation, we are just happy to address it. Some of you are further along in your simulation building than others. Some of you are just joining us for the first time today. So if you are joining us for the first time today, welcome, and we're just happy to catch up on some other things one-on-one. So at this point, 12:06, I'm going to turn this over to Chris again. Thank you for spending your lunch hour, your coffee hour, or with us today. So I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thank you very much, Brenda. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And sorry, I made a quick update of a typo. I misspelled analytics, so it's all corrected now. It's a pleasure to be with you for this third of our three-part series on the Makers Workshop, where we really go in depth. This is for kind of the folks who really want to kind of think about the advanced features and really get the most out of the Balancing Act. We try to make it something that's simple that you can set up in a few hours if you've got the data available, but we also have made Balancing Act in such a way that it's very feature rich and has a lot of different things that you can do. So Brenda already talked about the agenda today, so I'm going to just go ahead and skip ahead. I'm going to just sort of show you some of the advanced features. These are features that we usually help you with. It's not that some of them are not terribly hard, but there's probably not much economy of scale in you doing it without our help. For most of them, we're happy to help you. Actually, for all of them, we're happy to help you, and for most of them, it won't take very much time at all, but some are a little bit more involved than others. And then we'll talk about some of these other components as well. Okay, so this is our impact feature. This is one that we're just bringing on board, and Dan, our senior software developer who's on, is kind of continuing to hone this a little bit. But it's one that we're really excited about. I just got off a phone call earlier today with our Balancing Act Research and Education Consortium, which is about 40 university researchers, university-based researchers in local government that are trying to think about how simulations can help local governments get through these very hard times. And they were really enthusiastic about this one. So we don't have, we're still building working models of it, but we've got some prototypes. I'm just going to kind of illustrate the functions and not how it's set up. But in this instance, you've got a more typical Balancing Act with what we call the balance bar over here, and this shows the economic impact of decisions that you'd make in your simulation. But if you want, you can assign a secondary value to it. And in this case, it uses GFOA's framework for fiscal sustainability, and it basically shows you, well, if we make these decisions this year, this is what the impact might be in the year 2030. And what you can do is you can assign a secondary impact to items that really do have an impact 10 years down the road, such as the funding of pensions, or have you set aside monies for paid time off? Are you investing or underinvesting in infrastructure? So you can assign a value to those things. And the concept is simple, but we're trying to figure out how to simplify the creation of that. So that's one thing we have going on, and we're really welcome to input from the field. If you have some thoughts on this, or if you think this would be useful, please get in touch with one of us, and we'd love to hear what your thoughts are, what possible use case might be, and maybe some ideas about how we could make this something that would be useful to you. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick example of this as well. We do have one working example, and I think, let's see, it is here, and then it's here. So this was one that we created for the state of Arizona, and it was to show the impact of mitigation strategies for the settlement funds it received as part of the Volkswagen settlement. So some of you might remember a few years ago, Volkswagen had to pay settlements to each of the states in order to pay for projects that would reduce carbon emissions, or it's called nitrous oxides emissions, greenhouse gases, so that they could sort of make up for the higher than expected pollution from their cars. It was a little bit of a punishment. And so what the state of Arizona wanted to do was they wanted to share how they were proposing to spend the money, and largely they were proposing to spend the money on school buses, and then to show the impact both on cost and then the impact on the secondary indicator, which in this case is tons of nitrous oxides that are emitted. So it's got a really strong educational component. Down here, it shows revenue is very simple. It just talks about there's $51.5 million that can be used for mitigation projects. And then up here, the secondary indicator gets its own little context icon, and it talks about what nitrous oxides are. And then it gives you some additional information with some links, and then it talks about here's the quantifier where we actually went to get the estimates, and then it just gives some background information. I won't bore you with this, but then when you open up one of the spending categories, you can basically see some trade-offs. and that's what Balancing Act is best for, is so showing trade-offs along with some type of a numerical value that's associated with it. In most cases, the numerical value is the cost of a service or the cost of a level of service, but this adds a secondary dimension to it, which is also and how much greenhouse gas are we preventing if we do this. And so they've got the first option is reducing school buses, old school buses with new diesel buses. And you click on here and you find out that this would, essentially get old buses that are really highly polluting off the road and replace them with some new ones. And then over here, it just has some additional information, like each one of these buses costs $110,000, and they save 1.39 tons of nitrous oxides over 12 years. And so you can kind of just play around with it. The state of Arizona's proposed allocation is to spend most of this on these diesel buses, and you see that that's $38 million. But if you say, I think I'd like to, maybe reserve some money and maybe buy some electric school buses as well. And so you could say, well, let's only buy half as many of these diesel buses, and then let's go down here, and we can actually see. So when we go from here, 344 school buses, you've got this value in terms of savings on nitrous oxides. When you cut it in half, you have quite a bit less. So you're below the target. And then down here, if you say, okay, we've just saved ourselves $19 million, let's reallocate that money to buy some electric school buses. But the problem is you can only buy 68 of these. And if you go here, you see that kind of the same thing. You'd be replacing them. But you find out that these school buses cost $290,000, and they save a little bit more in terms of NOx reductions over 12 years, but not an awful lot more. And so you see, if you were to select this, you would still be below your target, and you've actually overspent your budget a little bit. So we're working on this. We try to make most things in Balancing Act highly configurable so that you have all sorts of flexibility to configure them the way that you want to. And we're excited about bringing this online, especially as local governments, hopefully, I know you're still in the midst of a downturn, but I think it's always great to keep your eyes on the prize. And so having something like this approach, where you might have some indicator of sustainability in the future, that can be really useful. Even a more practical, more immediate use for the secondary indicator could be for you to add the secondary indicator about how you would use reserve funds. So maybe some of the actions that you might be contemplating wouldn't necessarily require you to tap the reserve, but it could be that you decide that you want to tap the reserve 20, 30, 40, 50% even, depending on your policies. And this would actually be an interesting way for you to sort of say, okay, if we do the budget that we just talked about, if we have the spending we just talked about with our anticipated revenue, it's going to require us to dip into our reserves, and it's going to deplete them by 50%. Well, in some ways, that's what a rainy day fund is for. It's for a rainy day, and this is certainly a rainy day. But you also might, it's a good idea to keep an eye on it as well. So this is something, if you wanted to use this, please contact us. We think it's very powerful, but it's a little bit complex in terms of how it's utilized. The second one, you know what? It created a movie, or it moved to a movie. Sorry. The second one I wanted to show you is called dedicated funds. And this is a way for you to tie a spending item and a revenue item. So if you were to want a certain type of spending, you could let people know that you can only have that with a tax increase. Let me give you a quick demo of what that looks like. I think I've got it on my basic demo here. It's going to take just a moment to load. I'm just going to skip through these things. And if we go down here to taxes, and in this case, it's got the Better Road sales tax. This could be quite useful for you all. Maybe not immediately, but as you think about recovery, I know that some cities after the Great Recession actually did propose a tax increase to basically restore funding, and it may or may not be in the cards for you depending on your community's economic status and how your community feels about taxes, but this might be something useful for you. So in this case, you've got the Better Road sales tax that's being proposed. It's currently funded at $0, but if you were to click on this, you'd find out that this is under consideration by council due to the unavailability of new funds. And then it uses our scenario question functionality to ask this question: should sales tax be increased in order to fund transportation projects? And right now you've got no, but if you said yes, well, what would that look like? Well, so the thing here is because this isn't just a revenue option, it's a revenue option with a spending option attached. it opens up a window. And so what this window does is it connects the two sides of the simulation into a single unitary question. And so right now we've got yes, increase taxes to build transportation projects. I'm going to start with no. So let's see what no would look like. So it's okay. Sales tax it remains at 2%. This is just the city version, the city portion. And then the description here is that the city is not keeping up with demand and traffic delays are expected to increase. And you can click here for more details. And the one picture says 1,000 words. It means that you've got potholes and cones. And if you were to say yes, well, your tax rate would go up to 2.3%, so a 0.3 of a percentage point increase. You've got new transportation projects, there's some new money for that, and that you could then pursue those. And then we just used our very flexible context editor to add this video that I found on YouTube. And you can save it, and then you can go up here, and you can, it actually will link you to it. It will show you what you just bought. And so on the spending side, you're not able to do it. You're not able to do this. It just says this item is determined by the revenue source. So if you try to select it over here, it takes you back to that window. So it can be a very useful tool. It can also show dedicated funds. Say that you have a special sales tax that you pass that the funds can only be used for road maintenance or parks and recreation, or in some cases out west here, it's often for open space acquisition. You can actually show that certain monies can only be used for certain things, can't be popped into the general fund. So this one is I'm not gonna say it's super hard to use, but it's a little bit more complicated. So we usually help you with it if you wanted to use it. So once again, contact us if that's something you want to do. Okay, now let's move along here. Dedicated funds. And then this one is one that is really excited. I mentioned earlier that I was on a call this morning with our Balancing Act Research and Education Consortium. This is a group of local government researchers that have been studying public participation, and they've been studying local government and local government finance for decades now. And they've become very excited about the possibility of simulations to get informed, fact-based communication going, to have it be two-way communication, all the things that GFOA is recommending happen in terms of online financial transparency and participation. And there's a particular group, there's three researchers in this group that have gone even further. And they've shown that you can use a simulation in a way that's much more powerful than just a survey alone in terms of understanding budget preferences. So what we've done with them is we've created a special version of the simulation. It's a less complex version of the simulation, and then we've connected the opportunity to put a group of residents or respondents into it starts with a survey that asks a few questions, and then it channels people to the simulation, and then they get 10 minutes or so to go through and make choices. But the difference is between a survey and a simulation is that there are cost effects. So different levels of service have different costs associated with them. But most importantly, you can see interactions. So you can see interactions between increasing one spending item and decreasing another spending item, or you can see that you can't decrease two spending items, that you have to actually have a corresponding savings, or you need to be able to, you need to be willing to raise some taxes. And so what they like about this is that it sort of puts them in the same shoes as you, and it sort of, without making the interaction too complex, it illustrates the complexity, and it requires them to respond in the same way that you do. So it's not just that a budget survey says, we love the fire department and we love fireworks. Those two things are very different. One is a critical service. The other might be seen as highly desirable, but it's not an absolute necessity. And there's also vastly different costs for those two services. Whereas in Balancing Act, you could put those two items in, and people could see that one doesn't really cost very much, but it might have a lot of popular appeal. The other one is really an essential thing, and it costs an awful lot and a lot to maintain it, and it needs quite a bit of resource allocation within the budget. So this is something that we're able to do. We're able to do scientifically valid research. It is more expensive and more complex because we have to get the research subjects and so forth, but it's not something that's terribly, terribly difficult. So if you're in a situation where you want to go beyond just having this two-way engagement tool that, the typical use of Balancing Act simulation, we can actually accompany it with scientifically valid results. So some entities are in that situation, some are not. We can accommodate that if you wish. Okay, so let's look a little bit at analytics. So you've got, say you've got, 1,000, a couple thousand, 5,000 folks that have gone through the balancing act simulation, and you want to know what they said. Well, we have actually created a terrific opportunity for you to learn. So I'm going to go to, let's see, I think it's this one. This is Dubuque, Iowa. Dubuque, Iowa has really kind of presented themselves as sort of, as a great teaching case. This group of researchers and educators I was on this morning have actually created this very elaborate case study that's being used in MPA classes and certified public manager classes that is based on Dubuque. So I'm going to show you their back end. So this is from their 2020 interaction. And so this is the analytics function. So if you're just using simulations, we have a way for you to download a spreadsheet that has all of the clicks. It has all the results from your residents that have gone through the simulation. But we've also got this really nice tool called Analytics, which visualizes it and it adds a whole lot more detail and nuance to it. And we think that that's actually a pretty useful thing. So Dubuque had about almost 1,200 page views. So there's a town of about, I think about 38,000 people. This is a pretty good response. They had 11 minutes on site, which people who are familiar with web metrics will tell you this is a really good high amount of time to spend on the page. And then they had about 170 people submit. And so this number may seem low to you, and it seemed low to us when we first started tracking it. And so this is the number of people who submitted. And so as you might remember during the first Makers Workshop, I talked about the 3 C's of budget engagement. So context, constraints, and consequences. And so the reason why this 170 number is actually pretty good is that in order to submit a budget, they had to follow the constraints. They had to balance the budget. So if they wanted more spending, they had to make some cuts. They had to be willing to increase taxes. And so a lot of people drop off and they don't do this. And so, and even if you didn't require them to completely balance the budget, a lot of people, in the way they use the web, is they use it mostly just for educational purposes, and then they leave. But this is the number that actually went through all the trouble to submit their work. And so these folks are fairly easy for us to capture what their input was, and we have it both on a CSV, and then I'll show you in a minute. We also have it as a visualization. But we also wanted to have the other thousands or so people in the case of Dubuque that did this. And so what we've done is we take a snapshot of what a user does on our simulation every 30 seconds. And if that user ultimately goes on to submit, we replace that snapshot with their submitted data. But if they leave, we still keep the snapshot. And then we show you the last snapshot before they leave. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. So I'm going to get to that in just a minute. We've got a whole bunch of information about where the users are coming from, and we give you a little warning that this is all from Google Analytics, and it's only as accurate as Google Analytics. And so we take it as advisory, but not conclusive. But it just sort of shows you where Google Analytics thinks somebody is when they do the simulation. And if you're using a VPN or something like that, it's going to give an inaccurate result. It gives you sessions by age and new versus returning. This is another example where you need to sort of take it with a grain of salt. Dubuque, their particular use pattern was to use it in large meetings, especially with like young professionals. That was their target because they wanted to make the city responsive and have strong input from young professionals. And so they did a lot of large sessions. And so if they're using it all at once in the same place, anybody after the first person using it is being shown as a returning visitor. So once again, it's information, but it needs to be taken in context. This is age, gender, device type, and typically we have far more people that use desktop than mobile or tablets, but the simulation works perfectly well on all of them. Social networks, etc. This is where people found the simulation, and then this is the good part down here. So this is we give you 3 levels of detail in terms of understanding what people did, and this is the top level. This is at the category level, and so there's 4 types of information that are shown on this graph. So the first one is the gold bar, this guy right here, and that's the average of those who submitted. So that's the 177 or so who went through the trouble of satisfying the constraints and then submitting. And then the teal is the people who just clicked around, who just kind of played around. Maybe they might have spent 10, 12 minutes on it, but they left. And so that's what the teal is. And then median is the middle submission, which is a useful way of continuing to get some deeper insight to what people did. So it's just the middle of value. And then the mode. The mode is most popular. The mode can sometimes let you know if there's some outliers, like if there's just a relatively small number of people that had a very strong preference, like to, in this case, in our current environment, like defund the police, for example, you'd get to see that while most people didn't want to defund the police, the mode would actually show you that there were a relatively small number of people who did want to defund the police. And so we give you these 4 types of information, but we also let you do whatever you want with it. So if you don't want to show mode, you can get rid of it, and then you have everything kind of trending, sort of in the same direction, which is like what we like to see. It actually did the same thing with mode too, except in one instance, in terms of public safety, the most popular was an increase in public safety. Everyone else had a slight decrease. But it's just sort of a nice way of kind of seeing what people are doing. You can see that culture and recreation for Des Moines or Dubuque was the big item that people wanted to increase, and so we'll dig down deeper into that in just a moment and see why that was. And it was because they had a civic center project that they were trying to get input on, and what they found was that people kind of wanted to do that. They wanted to drive that a little bit, and in order to be to observe the constraint that you have, which is that you can't just manufacture money, they were okay with decreasing some items, minor decrease on streets and infrastructure, but mostly decreasing things. And then going down here to the revenue side, they also were willing to increase their taxes just a little bit in order to pay for the new spending that they said they wanted on the side of the culture and recreation. We give you tons and tons of information. I'm not going to go into all of it down here, but we tell you how many times each category was opened, how many times it was changed, etc. Let's do a drill down now into culture and recreation, which is the one that was increased so much. And we give you some top lines up here, which are kind of useful. But once again, I think that the really useful stuff comes down here where it's been visualized. And you see that, yes, in that culture and recreation category, the big thing that was driving it was this Five Flags Civic Center with some substantial increases on that. $1.8 million was the average increase. And then you can go down here and you can see, which items did people want to learn more about. So clicking our context icons, and over here, which items did people interact with the most. And then you can go down here and you can see all of their comments. And as you can see, some people were, not that in favor of it. They said sell it and be done with it. Some people would say, I like the library, I like parks, and so forth. And then you can drill down even more deeply and say, this Five Flags Civic Center, this is where people really, had a lot of interaction, and it's also a, fairly large budget item. Let's drill down a little bit more deeply there. And you get some top lines once again, and then down here you get it was a scenario question, so it was not the plus minus, it was a scenario type question. You actually get a nice breakdown of what people said. You can see that this was the status quo. This was the proposed item. Only about a third of people left that one untouched. Other people all wanted to do something else. And then the quick responses, there were some, also it just shows those varied a little bit. But the nice thing about this is that the city council found this to be very useful, and the professional staff of the city found this to be very useful, because what it told them was that while people may not know exactly what they want to do with the civic center, that tearing it down is not something that's terribly popular, that they want to do something with it. And so the action that came from this was that the city council said we need to learn more about our options, and they hired a planning firm to come up with some different scenarios. And I haven't checked into them for a while, but my hope is that this actually let them in a cost-conscious way better serve citizens and reflect community values and be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So that's how analytics work, and I'm going to keep on moving, but if you do have questions, go ahead and put them into chat, and one of my colleagues will answer them, or if it's something that is more general, we can discuss it a little bit. If you want to raise your hand and ask it yourself, we can unmute you, and so forth. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint here. And now let's talk about, it's really our second product. It's a really cool thing. It's called Taxpayer Receipt. And it's pretty neat. I'm going to go ahead and show you City of Denver's, the one that Brenda was just talking about. I wasn't going to show you that, so I don't have it pulled up. But since she reminded me that we've actually had a bunch of users, like hundreds and hundreds of users in the last couple of days. And so let me see if I can pull it up for you, and I'll show it to you. And is appropriate because, oh, there it is. It's appropriate because the taxpayer seat was created at the suggestion of the chief financial officer of the city of Denver. So as Brenda mentioned, we're based in Denver, and city of Denver 6 years ago when we first started creating what is now Balancing Act, they were our advisors in terms of what it was that we were trying to create and how we would make it useful. And as we got near the end of development of our first version of the simulation, the CFO said, you know, the other thing I'd really like to have is a tool that would demonstrate, demonstrate the value that residents are getting for their tax dollars. And so she gave the example of going around to community groups and business groups, civic groups, et cetera, to talk about the budget and the city's finances, just to, kind of her dog and pony show, her top line presentation. And she would always she would start asking a question. She would say, how much do you think the city of Denver spends per day or per year per person on average on snow removal? And people would usually guess about $200 bucks. And so she would let them get it completely wrong, and then she would say $12.50. How's that for a deal? And so what she told us she would really like to have is a way to estimate people's taxes that they pay that are usable by the city, and then to let them see what it goes towards. And in most cases, people are pretty astonished at the value they get for their tax dollar. So this is Denver's website. They've got it in Spanish as well as in English. And so you click on this, and so it's very simple. It just says, want a receipt for your taxes, answer a few questions to find out how much you paid. So it asks your income, and I'm just going to put in 50,000 bucks. And what we're doing, and then it also asks your age, and I'll just put in 40. And what it's doing is we worked with an economist to come up with a way of estimating how much sales tax somebody pays just towards the local government. And so what we base this on is some data from the Consumer Expenditure Survey. And so what that tells us is it allows us to do a lookup. So we say, okay, somebody's got $50,000 worth of salary. Consumer Expenditure Survey says, okay, X amount of that, say, $17,000 of that or so, can be used on goods and services. And then we do an estimate based on their age at the market basket of goods they buy. So my 90-year-old father, who buys almost nothing but healthcare services. And so he pays very little in sales tax to the city of Denver. But a 40-year-old, on the other hand, would be buying a lot of consumer goods where there is a sales tax attached. And so we use income and age to come up with a guesstimate of how much somebody spends on sales taxable items. And then we multiply that times the sales tax rate that the city has, not the overall sales tax rate at the cash register, because sometimes states, counties, districts would have an overlay on that, but only the portion of the tax that is payable by the city or whatever government is using the taxpayer receipt in order to come up with an amount. And then down here, we can add an additional type of tax, because residents of Denver pay not only sales tax, they also pay property tax. We've got several types of taxes we can put on this entry page. There's one more thing. This was actually suggested by one of our clients, was to say, well, gosh, if somebody spends money in the town next door, we don't get any of that. So why don't we have a sort of a subtle buy local push here by reminding people that if they go shopping outside of their hometown, that their hometown doesn't get the money. So let's just say 80% of this amount. Let me see if I've got this right here. 80%. We'll just say we do 80% of our shopping in town. And then down here, we can get a pretty good number. This is not even an estimate. It can be an actual number of how much property tax you pay. So we say, what is the actual value of your primary residence? And so this info icon will take you to the assessor's website, and you can do a very quick lookup. Just put in your address, and boom, it comes back. And we can do actual value. We can do assessed value. We can do market value. It really is whatever you want. The very easiest way to do this is to just ask for market value. Because most people have a pretty good sense of how much their house is worth, or they can go to Zillow and get a Zestimate, I guess it's called. And that can be a very useful thing. In this case, the city of Denver wanted actual value as determined by the assessor, and so it can be a very particular number. So the median household home cost in Denver is a whopping $450,000. I can't believe what's happened in my hometown. And then you can say, view your tax receipt. And so then it comes up with something that looks a lot like a Home Depot receipt. So you've got affordable housing. That person for whose numbers we just put in pays $21.63 for affordable housing. And so then you can go down here and you can see what the various things are. And so you see that, these items, the social impact bond, not very much. Denver Housing Division, almost nothing. But then there's this one, dedicated resources for affordable housing. Well, in 2016, Denver passed a special mill levy that is dedicated, and it can only be used for certain items. And so this is actually a fairly substantial amount of money. In some ways, this is sort of atypical, and a lot of places won't have these special dedicated sources of monies, but if you have them, we can actually work them. Same thing with capital projects. So this is a particular mill levy. Both of these, I think, were special mill levy elections that residents voted to pay for capital projects. But then you get into just the business of government, like you've got finance. So, very little, $61. You've got governing, $4.09. Mayor's office, $1.06. And that's not just the mayor, that's the cost of the mayor. That's the mayor's staff. It's an awful lot more. So if you have residents that are saying, if we just didn't pay, that city council and we just didn't pay the mayor as much, we'd have all the money in the world. Well, you know what? There's just not that much money here because they really generally don't comprise a very large portion of the budget. You've got health, you've got parks and recreation. This is the one I like the most, is recreation centers and programs, $13.19. And then you can see that supports 27 rec centers, 29 pools, and 10 rec programs. Of course, there's some cost recovery involved with this, but it actually shows it's a pretty good deal. You've got public safety and so forth. This one we think might get quite a bit more use and maybe even some more detail given some of the unrest that we're seeing and some of the calls to look at how much money is going to the police department. Our tools can certainly accommodate that, and we're thinking that it might be a way to sort of have a fact-based framing of that conversation that we're sort of hoping that some of our clients might bring to us and we can help them with it, and so forth. And then you can go down here to the bottom and you can see what the breakdown was between sales tax and property tax. And then if you click on this, it takes you to the simulation. So it's a pretty neat thing. So let's see how we build it. So I'm going to go back into my demo account, and under taxpayer receipts, we're going to create a taxpayer receipt. Now, if you've already got a simulation, it's pretty neat because you can actually pull in the spending categories from your simulation, and then it's just a couple steps to get your taxpayer receipt set up. I'm going to go ahead and create one from scratch. So we're just going to call this test for June 10. And then, as I was saying, if I wanted to duplicate last year's and just update a couple of values, I could duplicate it here. If I wanted to pull in the spending values from one of my simulations that I've already created, I could do this, and then I just choose the simulation down here that I want to pull it from. Or if I wanted to duplicate like last year's tax receipt, I can do that by simply doing the same thing. But let's go ahead and start from scratch. So I'm going to start from scratch, and then this looks very similar to the setup for the simulation. It's just that you only have one side. You only have the spending side that you're focusing on right now. So we're going to say continue. And I'm going to come back to that. These tabs look very familiar. They should look very familiar to you from the simulation. We'll come back to spending in just a moment, but we'll take these in order. Let's do revenue first. So there's three types of taxes that we can do that are configurable to you. And that's property tax, income tax, and sales tax. We've got some additional types like vehicle tax, or in Minnesota, they've got some progressive property taxes. So business, it's like the first $500,000 of property is taxed at one rate, and above $500,000 is taxed at another. We've got some situations, I think it's Kansas, where you deduct something from it, and it's sort of complicated. We can handle the complexity if you wish, but most of the time, for 90% of our clients, these three will usually give you what you need to do. So let's just go ahead and do these. And if you have one of the special use cases and you want us to help with it, it's a little bit of a customization, but it's not too bad. And we've probably encountered most of the quirks before, and we should be able to accommodate it. But let's just let's do property tax first. Let's just do the same as Denver. Let's do property tax and sales tax. So it opens up something that looks like a wizard here, and so you can see over here the fields that can be adjusted. And so essentially, if you want to adjust this value, you simply write that in here. I'm going to leave it because I think it's just fine. And then down here, this is kind of the main thing. This is the multiplier, where you want to put in the amount, and it gives some guidance down here. The multiplier it depends on what your mill levy is, on what your rate is, but it also depends on whether or not you're doing assessed value, market value, or actual value. So I'm going to put in, if I was doing 80 mills, I would do 0.08, and I think that should get us what we want. And then down here, this allows you to customize this screen, which is on the Denver version. This is where you put in a link to your assessor's website, use the same editor functions like we have in the rest of Balancing Act. And so that's property tax. And then let's do income tax is very easy because people just enter their income. But let's do sales tax, which requires people to enter their income and their age, as I showed you before. So let's just say that the tax rate that's attributable to your city or county or district is 2%. And then down here, you get the option, if you like this question about asking what percentage of your shopping do you do locally, you just click this on or off here. And I'm going to leave it. I think it's kind of neat. Like I said, it was proposed by one of our clients. We thought it was a nice idea, so we left it, but you can toggle it on and off if you want. Okay, so that's the revenue side. Let's go to spending. So I'm going to bring in that same spreadsheet that I've been using before. So we're going to, if I wanted to download the template, I could, but I'm just going to bring in my spreadsheet, and it's just my Anytown spending spreadsheet. And it's going to look very familiar from the previous workshops that we've had in the last couple of weeks. So you've got police, operations, detention, civilian staff, et cetera. Let's say the civilian staff question, it really doesn't fit in this context. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that. We're going to delete it. And then we're going to say, all right, I think that looks pretty good. Let's preview it. And so then it says, want a receipt for your June 10 taxes, answer a few questions, find out how much you paid. So let's go ahead and put in 50,000 as annual income. Put in 40 as an age, and we're going to say I do most of my shopping in town, and then we're going to say do you own a home? We're going to say yes, and let's go with a different assessed value. I think something around $30,000 might be appropriate for this, and then we're going to view the tax receipt. And then you can see that police, because we don't have very many spending items on this, police in this case would get about $1,000, operations, detention, and so forth. And this is a bit high, but I think it's mostly a function of this not being a very realistic spending profile for the taxpayer receipt. It'd be a little bit different in your instance. And then if we had a live budget here, this would take you to the simulation. So that's taxpayer receipt. Any questions on that? And I don't see any, but I'm sure my colleagues will let me know if you do. It's a really nice thing. And as Brenda was saying, before, when economic times were relatively good, this was a nice way for local governments to sort of have a type of budget engagement that was sort of evergreen. It could be used all year round. It could just live on your website. It's just a nice way of showing accountability. Elected officials love it because it shows both accountability and value for a tax dollar, and we think it's kind of a neat thing. Some people, I think, get a little bit afraid of it. I remember the first time I presented it to a group of CFOs. They're like, "Oh, I don't think I like this," and then I had them do it. It was actually for the state of Colorado. It was at the Colorado Government Finance Officers Association annual meeting, and they really were kind of wary of the idea, and then they actually went through and did it, and they're, that's pretty good. I think we kind of like this. Okay. So then the last thing that we're going to do in terms of setting you up for success and get you on your way with your Balancing Act subscription is to help you communicate it. And so we talk about the 3 C's all the time. We talk about constraints, context, and consequences. But there's really a 4th C, which is communication. And we've seen a couple instances where the Budget Finance Office has created this great simulation, but no one really knows it's there. It just lives on the budget finance page, and maybe 60 or 70 people might happen upon it over the course of a year. But don't be afraid to communicate about it. And what we found, I can't name one instance where there's been negative publicity from doing Balancing Act simulation. So this is a way for you to positively frame up a conversation, even in the context that Brenda was describing in the Sunday Denver Post, where it was the context of defund the police. the taxpayer receipt was is actually something positive. It's like, here's where your tax dollars are going, and if you think they ought to go someplace else, well, here's your opportunity in a fact-based way to provide some input. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples. I'm going to go kind of quickly through this because I want to leave time for questions. You know, there's direct communication, traditional media, social media, events, etc. This is one of my favorites. This is Charlottesville, North Carolina, and they just got, I think there's just some clip art, and they popped in our logo by permission, which we're happy to give, and they put this into the utility bill, and they had a very high participation rate. I think they got 1,000 people or so out of this, and they're a town of about 30,000. Great newspaper. This is from, I think, Quincy, Illinois. Unfortunate dermatological ad over here on the right, but the article itself was terrific, and I think got a lot of positive publicity and drew people to the simulation. Believe it or not, you can get TV. You can get TV in as big of media markets as Washington, D.C., or Pittsburgh, or Lynchburg, Virginia, where they actually got 2 different TV stations covering their use of Balancing Act, and once again, all very positive. Radio, this is actually a medium that works quite well for radio. Radio actually usually likes to link to the simulation. This is Syracuse, New York, and this is Milwaukee County. No, this is Dane County in Wisconsin. It's the county around Madison. Social media works really well. This is Stillwater, Oklahoma. Over here is Kansas City, and it works pretty well. This is a meme. I hope that this will show up. I think it's kind of funny. Just watch the dog and watch what he's doing here. And he is in favor of basically defunding everything in the city except for dog parks, which this is actually the shape of something that you could use for Facebook. And we created this for Stillwater, and if you wanted us to create something like this for you, I think we've got the files that we could edit, so let us know. What we found to be really probably the most effective is simply to have use our customizable entry feature and pop a video in there. And this is, I think we showed you this guy before. This is the mayor of Fairbanks, Alaska, and he's just looking into the camera saying, we've got some important things to work on, and we need you to understand some key things about our government, about our revenue situation, and we would like to have your informed input, and that can be very effective. Just a couple of other videos. This is Charlotte, North Carolina. Once again, big city. They've got some high production values. They actually built like a commercial that went like 30 seconds long. You don't have to do that at all. I think that the previous one where the mayor just looks into the camera, or your city manager, or something like that, that's equally as effective. This one over here, this is Cambridge, Minnesota. It's a small town, about 6,000 people, and they created this really fun video where they got 2 actors who are residents of the town to dress up like old Norwegians, Lena and Oli, and they're having a conversation with the mayor about why it's important to have residents provide some input on what the budget priorities should be. Once again, low production value, easy to create, kind of fun, and it helps invite people in to kind of learn about the budget and to provide their informed input. Events. This is from Cherry Creek School District. It's a southern suburb of Denver. This meeting, this is a giant auditorium. They had about 450 people come to this. And in this session on the right, they were learning about the overall situation. The superintendent and the president of the board and chair of the finance committee made presentations. And then it took place in a high school. They had all the parents go to classrooms where they walked through the simulation themselves, and it was very effective. You could do a branded campaign. This is the one I just showed you, Cherry Creek Forward. Fund Phoenix is a nice one. This doesn't always happen, but this is something that it's kind of neat, and it might be something worth thinking about. I just added this slide. We've had a situation, where there's a real disconnect, and there's actually some research on this that shows that while professional staff tend to be generally supportive of doing public engagement on the budget, they generally are not that comfortable with it, is what the research shows. And what they would rather do is have elected officials take the lead on doing public engagement, because they think that it's sort of a public-facing thing. It's political. It involves interaction with constituents. And I think that's fine, and it's not inappropriate. I think it could, the budget engagement can happen in a lot of different ways, and we've seen a lot of good examples with it. But thinking about this particular time with a downturn, I think it puts elected officials in really a difficult position, because they are the public face of government, and whatever cuts or tax increases, they're going to be the ones associated with it. And so I think this is really the time to give them a tool to have a fact-based conversation with residents, so that they can make good decisions, so that they can explain hard choices, and hopefully get some input and help lead the community through what is going to be probably a pretty tough time. And to the degree that you as professional staff, I think we've mostly got professional staff on this call, can use your skills and expertise in the budget to create a simulation that sort of frames up the right conversation that needs to happen, between elected officials, the city, and the public, or amongst stakeholders within a city or the county or the school district, et cetera. I think that can be a really powerful way for you to use your skills and your role and your lane in this whole process, but to help them ground it in facts and to help them focus it. So we've talked before about the way we view the simulation as a facilitation tool. I continue to think that's true. It's a facilitation tool that really requires a lot of expertise to create, and so that it can appear simple and understandable to the non-budget people who you really need to participate in some way. So those non-budgetary people being non-budget people who are staff in your city, in your county, in your school district, in your special district, the residents who probably don't have a very good understanding at all about your budget, and then also those elected officials that they get a big budget book and they don't know exactly what to do with it sometimes, and you can actually use a simulation to help create those conversations that need to happen, and you can really provide a good service to elected officials to do their job and their communication with their constituents. Okay, I think that is about it. So I'm going to stop there, and if you have questions, please ask them using chat or using the questions feature, or raise your hand or whatever.
So I don't, Brenda, I don't the dog. Hold on. Chris is going to take over.
Okay, so I guess Brenda's dog was barking. So part of the joys of our new era is that people, I think, are much more forgiving when you're working at home and your dog barks or your kid. I was on a Zoom call this morning and someone's kid jumped up on her lap, and I find it kind of refreshing. So anyway, Brenda, I don't know if your dog has stopped barking or not, but does anybody have any questions? No problem.
That was going to be the point. Does anybody have questions? But if you don't, I know that several of you have been in touch with Peter and are building your simulation with his assistant. Some of you are talking to Chris, some of you are talking to myself. One of the things that is just a hallmark of our company is that we want to make sure that this is, to be honest, this is, Chris and I did set out to, this is something we care about deeply. We had other careers before we came to this. We just saw we just feel passionate about that resident citizens need to have an understanding of this. So, we want all municipalities, special districts, large, small, medium-sized, to be able to participate in this. So please, different kinds of budgets. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions whatsoever. And as I said, I know several of you are talking to Peter, and some of you are clients already and are looking to maybe do some different things with your budget this coming year. Happy to help, be creative, and yeah, just on behalf of all of us here at Balancing Act, thank you so much for participating in these makers workshops. We'll be sending you the recording as always. And if you have any other questions, please just reach out. We're just a Zoom call or a phone call, email away.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And we wish you all the best. And we're here to help if we can. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.